Hey everybody, I'm Jeff Wall, and today we are counting down the most undeserving title shots of all time. In the world of prize fighting, whether it be boxing or MMA, it's all about, well, the prize, whether it be from the promoter's perspective or the fighter's. When it comes to that, it's all about who you can sell and who you can sell to. For hardcore MMA fans, this drives most of us crazy because we're going to watch the fights anyway, and promoters know that, which is why they know that the money is in the wallets of the casual fans, who really ultimately, rightly or wrongly, only care about name value. So we're going to be breaking down some of the ones that have drove hardcore MMA fans crazy, and maybe some of the fighters themselves.
Now, just so you're all aware, all the fights we're going to be talking about today are in the UFC. This is by no means due to bias for or against the UFC or any promotion. Let me explain. Before the economic boom, I guess you could say, of MMA, which started around 2009, no promotion had a massive roster of fighters, and so for the most part, the most promotable names were the best fighters. The same goes for the small promotions today. In Bellator, Strikeforce, One, and the rest, no one really gets leapfrogged. As for our scoring criteria today, these matchups will be awarded a score out of 15. 5 possible points for leapfrogging deserving contenders, 5 for a fighter's lack of recent success going into a title shot, which we have called record/resume, and 5 for inactivity leading into the undeserving title shot.
Now, without further ado, let's get started. Our number 5 fight on the countdown is Alexander Gustafsson getting a title shot versus DC Daniel Cormier. Now, I know what you're thinking. This fight ended up being really competitive. It was a barn burner. It was a great fight. But either way, it probably shouldn't have happened when it did. Let me explain.
During one of Jon Jones' many layoffs from the sport, Daniel Cormier was ruling the light heavyweight division. DC had just won the 205-pound crown after a beatdown of the surging and dangerous Anthony Rumble Johnson with an RNC victory. Of course, the light heavyweight division is a very thin one, so it doesn't take too many wins to get a crack at the belt. Alexander Gustafsson at this point in his career is a household name, a top fighter in the division with one of the best fights ever against Jon Jones where he pushed him to his limits. However, going into what would be another all-time great scrap for the belt in which Gustafsson would give everything he had, the Mauler wasn't exactly the most deserving contender at the time. Ryan Bader was in the best form of his career and was a clear-cut top contender. Gustafsson, on the other hand, was 1-2 in his last 3, losing to Jones in 2013, beating Jimmy Manuwa in 2014, and then getting mauled in Sweden by Anthony Johnson. On top of all that, Bader fought Rashad Evans in the co-main event. That is next level disrespect. This one gets a 2 out of 5 for inactivity, 3 out of 5 for record/resume, and 4 out of 5 for leapfrogging, getting a total score of 9 out of a possible 15.
Now, for our first honorable mention of this countdown goes to Tom's River's own Frankie Edgar when he took on Jose Aldo Jr. for the first time for the 145-pound belt.
We start off with a fighter who has rightfully earned just about all the praise he has gotten during his long MMA career. Frankie Edgar was notably a small lightweight, even by the standards of 2012. He announced his plans early that year that he would drop down for a second division title. He had just come off 2 back-to-back losses at the hands of Benson Henderson. The now former lightweight champ needed a change of scenery. He noted he barely cut any weight at all to make 155 in the first place. And with his immediate rematch with Bendo a failure, despite how close it may have appeared, it was time for a change. Originally scheduled to fight Ricardo Lamas, then stepping in to fight Aldo as a replacement for Eric Koch in 2012, that fight would be scrapped as well. But Edgar would eventually face off with the Brazilian in 2013 at UFC 156. Frankie licked his wounds and took on Aldo, who at the time was considered by some to be the pound-for-pound best. Edgar would ultimately lose in a competitive but not entirely close fight with the all-time great. The featherweight division was still growing at the time, but had quite a few legitimate contenders including Eric Koch, the Korean zombie Chan Sung Jung, Cub Swanson, and of course Ricardo Lamas.
Our number 4 most undeserving title shot goes to Dan Henderson, well, just because Michael Bisping wanted a little bit of revenge.
One of the more heartwarming late career runs was Michael Bisping's. Bisping made it big as the first non-American Ultimate Fighter winner. Over the years, he would struggle to earn a title shot. As time went on, at the age of 37, Bisping finally achieved a dream of becoming a UFC champ. The Count had a few rough defeats on his way to the top, but none more notable and more humiliating than the loss to Dan Henderson. But Hendo was an absolute shell of himself at this time. The miles had been piling on, and the war wounds were severe. Hendo was 2-5 in his last 7 fights going into the rematch, and all of his losses were either devastating KOs or the former Pride champ getting the brakes beaten off him. He was coming off a KO win over Hector Lombard, but was ranked outside of the top 10 in the middleweight division. I guess those rankings really don't mean anything after all, do they? Henderson, like St. Pierre, would end up leapfrogging Gegard Mousasi, Robert Whittaker, and Yoel Romero, all incredibly worthy contenders.
See you soon, boy.
All right, so Hendo gets a score of 1 out of 5 for an activity, 3.5 for record and resume, and 5 out of 5 for leapfrogging, giving him a score of 9.5 out of a possible 15 on the countdown.
Of course, you all had to know that we couldn't get through this whole countdown with at least a mention of the Notorious One. Well, you actually get a little bit more of a mention on this one as he comes in at number 3 for his title shot against Khabib Nurmagomedov at UFC 229.
Look, everyone knows Conor McGregor is a star and a money-making machine. Him, along with Ronda Rousey, are responsible for a ton of attention MMA gets today. It's tough to deny that. However, as the dollars have started pouring in and the fame become enormous, we've seen less and less of him in the cage. Going into his fight with Khabib Nurmagomedov, Conor McGregor was a former lightweight champ that eventually had to give up his belts due to inactivity. Going into this fight with Nurmagomedov, McGregor hadn't competed in MMA in over a year. Although his last fight was a win and perhaps one of his best over Eddie Alvarez to win the lightweight strap, McGregor was in the deepest end of the most competitive division in MMA history. McGregor would end up fighting Nurmagomedov before other incredible fighters on incredible streaks like Tony Ferguson and Dustin Poirier. McGregor never came close in this one. Maybe some fights in between would have helped. So Conor McGregor earns a score of 3 out of 5 for an activity, 2 out of 5 for record/resume, 5 out of 5 for leapfrogging, and 10 out of a possible 15.
Our final honorable mention on the countdown goes to Ronda Rousey in what would be her last fight in an MMA cage before she completely disregarded the sport and its fans and its media forever. And yeah, I'm telling you right now, no one's gonna forget that.
New champion Amanda Nunes had just completed her rise from part-time fighter to UFC champion after breaking Miesha Tate to win the belt at UFC 200. Nunes was an absolute force and just hitting her stride as she was finally able to start training full-time for the first time in her career. Rousey was coming off one of the greatest upset losses of all time in an over 70,000 seat stadium in Australia to Holly Holm. Rousey was rightly considered at the time to be at the very least the best women's bantamweight fighter, if not the best female fighter of all time. She was also a massive cash cow for the UFC and a transcendent star. The world was waiting for her return to the cage, and new UFC owners at WEIMG, who were also Rousey's management, and UFC President Dana White knew the payday they were in for when she came back. Rousey would end up leapfrogging challengers like Raquel Pennington, Juliana Pena, and Valentina Shevchenko. In the end, Rousey would get starched by Nunes in what would be the last fight in the cage for an all-time great.
All right, ladies and gents, for our number 2 spot on the countdown, it's a legend of the sport making his return after a long hiatus. It's Georges St. Pierre taking on Michael Bisping for the 185-pound belt.
Conor McGregor captured the UFC lightweight title in 2016, becoming the first, quote, double champ in UFC history. And suddenly, every mixed martial artist, champion or not, wanted to have multiple belts around their waist. Now in 2017, Michael Bisping was the middleweight champion. Georges St. Pierre was on a 4-year-long break from the sport. His last fight was November 16th, 2013, when he defended his title in a close but very controversial decision over Johnny Hendricks at UFC 167. With a second ACL surgery, and a move up to a weight class he has long said was too much for him, St. Pierre's condition would be completely unknown. And when it comes to knowing if a fight is going to be competitive, that really does matter. GSP would win in a very rough fight by submission and relinquish the title. St. Pierre leapfrogged great contenders like Robert Whittaker, Gegard Mousasi, and Yoel Romero.
Hey, Dana, give me the fucking boy.
The great George St. Pierre gets a score of 5 out of 5 for inactivity, 2 out of 5 for record/resume, 5 out of 5 for leapfrogging, getting a possible 12 out of 15, but just falls short of the number 1 spot.
Now, the man that has so wrongfully earned his title shot rightfully earns the number 1 spot on this very countdown. This one has a bit of it all. You got some clear and obvious promotional bias, leapfrogging, some great contenders, as well as no resume to speak of in the last 4 years. Well, he's fighting tonight, and he is Dominick Cruz taking on Henry Cejudo at UFC 249.
Dominick Cruz has not won a fight since beating Uriah Faber at UFC 199. His last fight was a dismantling at the hands of Cody Garbrandt in 2016, where he lost his title. After all these years of talking smack like he was going to compete anytime soon, Cruz will finally return against the king of cringe, Henry Cejudo. Cruz, who has been held together by paper clips and silly string at this point in his life, has only been scheduled twice in the last 3 years since losing his belt, and has pulled out of both fights due to injury. And now, in what remains of one of the most stacked divisions in the sport, he is leapfrogging fighters like Corey Sandhagen, who is currently number 4, Peter Yan, who is currently number 3, and Aljamain Sterling, who is currently ranked number 2, the 3 top contenders in the division. With all that in mind, Cruz is the clear and easy money fight. As a UFC commentator, and Daniel Cormier calling him the game's smartest man, it either makes you want to root for Cruz or want to see him get punched in the face even more.
Now, what could be a potentially terrible outcome of this one is Dominick Cruz wins the belt, but can't defend it because his body is literally falling apart. Or, potentially, he could say that he likes this win and caps off his career and rides off into the sunset, which at this point is something no MMA fan should have any appetite for at all. So guys and gals, I hope you liked this video. Please make sure, as I said before, to like, share, subscribe, and of course, let us know in the comments if there's maybe a topic you want us to cover, or if you would like these videos to change up a little bit. Maybe you want them a little bit shorter, or you want them a little bit longer. Either way, let us know, because ultimately, we're here for you.